So welcome and thank you for your interest in learning more about the relevance of the link in social work and social care. I'm Rebecca Stevens and I'm Associate Professor in Social Work at the University of Sussex in England, and I'm also one of the trustees with the Links Group. Andrea.
Morning, everybody, and thanks for having us here. I'm Andrea. I'm a vet by training. I'm based in the Foyle area, as you can probably tell by the accent, and I am strategic delivery lead for the Links Group. So I'm going to be navigating through the slides on Rebecca's instructions. So I'll just turn my microphone off now and over to Rebecca.
Thank you. Okay, so if you move to the next slide, so just a little bit about what we do to set some context. So the Links Group raise awareness of the link between the abuse of people and animals through support, training and interagency working. We train many professionals from a range of disciplines to recognise and act on suspected cases of non-accidental injuries and abuse by providing a range of resources, running continuing professional development courses and teaching veterinary students about the link. We also run an active subgroup providing support and guidance for those working specifically to help victim survivors escape abusive homes through our pet fostering services. And Andrew's going to be talking about those later this morning. So our training really provides a forum which connects all of those working to tackle this really complex and interconnected issue, from those working in veterinary and animal welfare to human services professionals working in domestic abuse and child abuse, including social workers, teachers, the police, health visitors and safeguarding leads. So if you are involved with any aspect of the link or would like to support our work, please get in touch. You can see the links here, the website and our social media channels. Okay, so let's look at what we're going to be covering today. So the focus of this session is really to shine a light on the importance of considering companion animals in the lives of people that you support in your practice. Unfortunately, there is an ugly side to the human-animal bond. So today we will be talking about how child and domestic abuse and the abuse of animals are connected, a term that we will be referring to as the link. So you may hear us use the term pet and companion animal interchangeably throughout the presentation. These terms refer to domestic animals, including farm animals that people own and care for. Next slide. So, excuse me, all of that said, considering, what your professional background is, you will be familiar with this. It's really important for us to acknowledge what we will be sharing today. So while Andrew and I have been really careful in the use of our imagery, we won't be showing any graphic images of animal abuse. However, while we've made all attempts to maintain some balance in the content, some of it might actually be quite hard to hear for you. So unfortunately, while this is a challenging topic, it is an absolutely necessary one to talk about. It is serious and it is very much a reality. So, we both encourage you to just be mindful of your own self-care needs and seek support if needed following the presentation. Okay, just to set some further sort of context around the UK. So from numerous studies and research, we know that animals can positively impact human health and well-being, as you can see the statistics here. I'm pretty sure that statistically, many of you on this webinar probably live with a companion animal or have loved an animal in the past. So you will have a degree of understanding of, and some of these statistics might really resonate with you. So we know that more than half of the UK population lives with either a dog, cat or a rabbit, with a high majority of people seeing their pets as family members. And so while these species are more common in family households, it's also important to acknowledge that other species like fish and birds, because people also form strong bonds with any animal, and also assistance animals having a particular role and bond. And this is important to note and remember, because we're going to revisit this later in the presentation. So the next slide. So When we talk about one health, one welfare, it's a concept that really considers the interconnections between human, animal, and environmental health and well-being. And it's about collaboration between different disciplines to improve health and welfare for all. And I just want to draw your attention to this because this idea is reflected in the British Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics, as you can see here. And I don't know whether you have been familiar with this or even realised that it was in our Code of Ethics, but here it is. Okay, so for those of you who do have a pet or have had a pet before, we know that companion animals can be such an integral part of family life and also can be seen as having a variety of different roles, as you'll note here on the slide. So when we refer to the benefits of caring for an animal, this can be considered as natural benefits, which are really the everyday living experiences with the animal through positive interactions. And then we talk about task-trained benefits when the animal is taught to perform certain tasks, such as in the case of service animals or emotional support animals, detection or medical alert animals. So it's really important to consider the areas of health and well-being that animals can impact because the responsibility of caring for an animal can actually give someone a role, a routine, and a purpose in life. And this is particularly true for people who experience isolation or loneliness because the responsibility of caring for an animal is a reason to leave the house, is a reason for a dog walk. And this can facilitate social connections and promote civic engagement. And of course, the benefit, will benefit the animal too. So, as you can see here on this slide, as I mentioned a little while ago, there is an ugly side to the human-animal bond. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into this now. And I'd like to open this with a quote from Phil Arkell, who's based in the States, who has done extensive research and work in this area of the link. And this statement really rings true here. So when animals are abused, people are at risk. And when people are abused, animals are at risk. So this is really the theme that we're going to be discussing today. So why is this topic important? Really, really want to draw your attention to the stats here. For some of you, you might not have ever considered this link, and some of you might have some degree of knowledge or prior knowledge. But there has been quite a bit of research actually in this area that evidences this is a really serious issue. Our colleague, who's also one of our Links Group trustees, Dr. Mary Wakeham, did some research that Andrea will be discussing a bit more a bit later. But her evidence findings, the findings from her research evidence a co-occurrence rate that you can see here of nearly 90% when pets are used as a strategy of coercive control to threaten, intimidate, and silence family members. And similarly, you can see the other stats where animal abuse is committed either alongside the abuse of children and adult victim survivors, or where abuse to animals is a precursor to committing further serious crimes to people. So these are quite alarming stats, actually, but they also show this link, this really strong link between animal sexual abuse and the sexual abuse of children, which is very much still a taboo subject. It is really hard, very confronting and difficult to talk about it, but we cannot shy away from having these conversations because as you can see with the stats here, it is happening at alarming rates. What strikes me personally, actually, is this last one here, which I found very recently, as in last week. And this highlights the exposure of animal cruelty and abuse on young people through social media. So the concern that I have is how children and young people may become both traumatized but also potentially desensitized by watching these horrific acts of animal cruelty and abuse. Next slide. So sadly, the abuse of animals linked to the abuse of people is not uncommon. And so these captions are news headings that really evidence the prevalence of the link a bit more. So these people who have abused animals have gone on to abuse their partner, their children, and others. And these people on here on this screen as part of these news features are fathers, their mothers, their children and young people who may or may not have been known to children's services or adult social care. And what I want to draw your attention to here is the date of each of these news features. And these are just five news stories that I randomly found all within a 2-week period in November of 2024. Now, since then, there have been so many, and even this month alone, even if you did a quick Google search, you will be astounded at how many of these very similar news features appear. And again, these are the ones that we know about. Okay. So next slide. So this was a billboard that the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals put up in Haringey in London. And it was subsequently banned by the Advertising Standards Authority and taken down in 2012. It was taken down because it was causing offence and distress to the people that lived in that local area. But I've chosen to show you this because it is still in the public domain because of the connection to social work and social care. So Stephen Barker, who appears on this poster, was the boyfriend of the mother of baby P. And now I'm sure the social workers on this webinar will be very well aware of the tragic circumstances around baby P's death in 2007, being tortured and subsequently killed by his mother and her boyfriend, this man on screen. Stephen, this man, was fascinated by pain, and he had a history of torturing frogs and guinea pigs. Now, you might not have known this. I certainly didn't, because it wasn't really publicised at the time of the serious case review into Peter Connolly's death. But here is a strong example of how cruelty to animals can link to further violent crimes. And so this is why it's so crucial that social workers and social care professionals remain professionally curious and pay attention to and ask about the pets. Andrea.
Thank you, Rebecca. So for this next section, just a reminder of what Rebecca said earlier, we are going to be talking about abuse of animals, and while carefully considered, and we respect that you are all professionals, what we often find is that when we cross the species barrier and talk about abuse of animals, sometimes our threshold to hearing about that or seeing that can drop. So just please do mind yourselves. This is going to be very much a whistle-stop tour. For anybody who is interested in finding out more, we run our UK-wide face-to-face multi-agency training day series. We're actually going to be in the Denadre on the 17th of February with Women's Aid, NSPCC, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, Specialist Animal Fostering Services presenting as well. So if anybody's interested in that, please get in touch with me and I can give you much more detail. So animals experience a range of forms of abuse that will be familiar to all of you on this call. So physical abuse is probably the first one that comes to mind. Animals also experience emotional abuse. As Rebecca's outlined, they experience sexual abuse and they experience neglect. Economic abuse in the context of domestic abuse involving animals can lead to neglect, but economic abuse can occur affecting animals independently of neglect as well. But underpinning all these forms of animal abuse in the context of domestic abuse is the not so golden thread of controlling and coercive behaviours. And I'm going to use the work of our colleague, Dr. Mary Wakeham, to illustrate that for you, give you some real life examples. So Mary's thesis was animal abuse as a strategy of coercive control. And in her study, there were a number of parts to her study, and the part that we're going to focus on here is a survey of 94 households. And this was a self-selecting survey. And those who took part in this aspect of the survey were all women. And in those households where women were living with domestic abuse and they had animals, 70% of them reported physical abuse of animals. And I suppose that's probably the form that most of us in society will think of when we think of animal abuse. But important to recognise that 63% of this population also experienced threats of harm to their pet. And 56% of them the animals experienced multiple forms of abuse, or the animal caregiver was faced with those threats of harm as well. And neglect, you can see, features quite highly there too at 94%. Now, what Mary didn't look at in this survey, because this was the first piece of work she'd done in this area, and what Mary will say herself is that sexual abuse of animals just wasn't on her radar at that time. It very much is now. So Mary didn't ask about sexual abuse in this particular piece of work. And what we know anecdotally is that it's not the type of information that people will tend to proffer unless they're asked. So that will be covered in Mary's current piece of research. She's currently mapping the abuse of animals onto domestic abuse related death. That's a 2-year study, part funded by DEFRA. And again, happy to tell anybody more about that. It's turning up some interesting results already. And you can also see the high percentage of pets who were killed as a result of abuse in this study. So what type of animals are abused? Dogs and cats are probably the ones we think of most because they're the most common household pets. But it's really important to recognize that any person can form any bond with any type of animal. So for those of you who are working in the home, social workers out on home visits, carers, home carers in particular, education officers, education welfare officers who are out making home visits, anybody working in the home at all, you may recognize some of these animals. And we ask you to think about the hidden animals or invisible animals. So, for example, you know, the hamster in the child's bedroom. And Rebecca will come on to talk later about how exploring that relationship in your role as a human safeguarding professional can help to build rapport. Now, the next slide that I'm going to show before I do show it, I just want to explain it is hard hitting. For that reason, we won't share this in your notes slide when you get those after the event, and I'm not going to read them out. I'm just going to ask you to take a look at it. It is important that you recognize that this type of abuse is happening, and it is happening in households where children are present, and in some cases the children are present when animals are harmed or killed. So I'll just go on to the next slide and give you a minute to look at that. So that doesn't make particularly pleasant reading, but as we say, we choose to show this, we choose to show this with caution, but we recognize the roles that you all play, and it is essential for us to communicate this information to you. So thank you. And I can't stress enough that coercive and controlling behaviours underpin everything there. And you can, from that previous slide, you can probably understand the impact that that would have on a person who is living with domestic abuse. I can do this to the dog, I can do this to the cat, toe the line, or you'll be next. So, how does living with that form of abuse, watching that happening to an animal, being forced to take part in that abuse to an animal, what does that do to someone who is living with it? Well, it does a lot, but one of the things that we want you to focus on here today is to get a better understanding that people are often no more able to leave their animals than they are to leave their children. Most people who have pets will consider them part of the family, and it is essential for us all to recognize that when we're dealing with safeguarding and safety planning. So you can see from Mary's work that 40 in of a sample size of 62 people in this case, 42% disclosed that they delayed leaving their abuser because of their pet. They had nowhere to go, or they couldn't risk leaving the pet with the abuser because they knew what would happen to the pet if they did. 37% stayed, again, because they had nowhere to go, they had no options, and 15% returned to their abuser because of threats of harm or because of worry about harm to their pet, to their animal, and 6% didn't reply. So you can see there a survivor quote. We believe it's very important to put the survivors' voices here. He told me if I tried to leave, he would kill my dog. That's not an isolated quote. We hear that time and time again through the fostering services, and we know of occasions where that threat has been carried out. So if you imagine it's really hard to leave if you've got a dog, and it's really hard to leave if you have a cat. What about if you've 400 cattle? Are you going to leave? Where are you going to go? Are you going to take them with you? And this is really important in the context of Northern Ireland because of our demographics, both people and animals, and because of our rural populations. So I'll come on to that in a wee bit more detail later, but I just want you to remember that picture. And if you've got 40 ponies, you run a riding school, or you've got horses at livery yard, they're not easy to hide either. They're not easy to take with you. And we have upcoming regulations in Northern Ireland about traceability, or following the movements of horses, which could make it even more difficult for those who are living with domestic abuse to flee. So again, underpinning all this is power and control. And Mary's work led to official adaptations of the Duluth Power and Control Wheel, which you'll all be familiar with. So the one on the left outlines using animals, and the wheel on the right outlines forms of abuse of animals. So again, we're under time pressure here. Just to say, these wheels, these resources are freely available to download from our virtual learning hub, which we'll direct you to later. But they're really, really useful when you're working with a victim survivor to help them understand that what they're living with isn't normal, that it is a form of abuse, and it can be really helpful for those professionals working in this field as well to help them understand what the victim survivor is living with, particularly when you're doing risk assessments. So to put this in the Northern Ireland context, does abuse happen here? Of course it does. So our colleagues at Assist NI that we work in partnership with, they're the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Abuse Commissioned Advocacy Service for Children and Adults in Northern Ireland. And they've pulled some information here for us from real and recent cases in Northern Ireland, outlining physical and sexual abuse of animals, examples where animals were killed, and where controlling and coercive behaviour underpins this. So I've highlighted some bits there, illustrating pet pigs, a boar, a male pig, and dogs, a family goat. So kicking and killing the family goat, and still at that business when the police arrived. Dogs were locked deliberately in a caravan and burnt alive by the perpetrator in one case. Another perpetrator would try to make his victim survivor complicit in the abuse by asking her to wear high heels and stand on small animals such as guinea pigs to kill them as part of a sexual relationship. And then manipulation. It's very common for an abuser to love their animals as well, and to treat their animals well, but to treat their victim survivors' pets differently, because the perpetrator is the common factor, and the human animal bond and the ability to manipulate the strength of that bond is what they're out to do. And you can see there as well, again, this is hard hitting, but cats put in microwaves and used as threats. And paramilitary involvement can also involve animal and animal related crime. We know from Professor Aisling Swain's research in UCD that paramilitary involvement in domestic abuse in Northern Ireland is important to consider as well. So further local examples, quickly flick through these. This is recent examples from the northwest of Northern Ireland. And this is where a man punched his partner when she told him she was pregnant. And he grabbed her by the throat and punched her in the face. and he also kicked an 11-week-old puppy during that attack as well. Now, this image that's coming up next shows a dog in a very emaciated and poor state, but it has been repeatedly used in the press, so we show it here judiciously. This is Luna, a dog who was found partially buried with multiple forms of non-accidental injuries, deliberately inflicted harms all over her body, and she was put to sleep, so gently euthanized by the vet when she arrived with them. And what we want to illustrate here is that the person responsible for Luna being in this condition and other dogs being removed from him as a result of Luna being found, when he was on bail for this offence against Luna, he was jailed for other offences. And those of you who perhaps live locally and are on social media will understand that this person has been accused of many, many, many other offences as well. And I also show this image of Katie Simpson. So we're likely in Northern Ireland all too familiar with the murder of Katie Simpson, and there is no doubt that the love that Katie had for horses played a critical role in the ability of her abuser to manipulate and control her from when she was 10 years old. So again, to focus this in Northern Ireland, why is it important for you as the people, speaking as the animal person here, why is it important for you to ask about animals when you're doing risk assessment? So, a kind of tongue in cheek here, put up a population of animals in Northern Ireland. You can see the human population, people population, is on the left there. We're just shy of 2 million according to NISRA. 23 million poultry. So that's a lot. So let's take that skewed example out. And you can see here, even when we remove the birds, livestock, that includes, by that we're including cattle, sheep, pigs. There are more sheep in Northern Ireland than there are people. And there are just shy of 4.5 million livestock, farmed animals in Northern Ireland. And you can see horses, there's about 35,000, but it's still a very important population. And the most conservative, statistically backed up estimates of dog and cat population is just around 500,000. Realistically, it's probably closer to 800,000 because we don't have good control of dog and cat numbers, better control of horse numbers, and pretty reliable estimates of livestock population. So it's a good bet that if you're working with people in Northern Ireland, that they are in some way closely related to animals, and that bond has the potential for manipulation. And it has just as much, if not more, potential for manipulation if you're living in a rural area and you're living on a farm. Now, when I first saw this picture, what I saw was a farmer. We'll all see the man as a farmer. And I actually thought that was his wife. But Rebecca pointed out that's a little boy. But that's me as the vet out on farm seeing that. And the reason I put that picture up, it's really important to recognize that if you're living on a farm, these old ideas of the farmer and the farmer's wife, that's not the reality of life on a farm. If you live on a farm, you're working on a farm. And NISRA statistics will show us that just over 37% of the population in Northern Ireland are in some way associated with a farm, either as a farmer, as a farmer's wife, as a farmer's family, or a farm worker. But then when we look at these statistics, we see that 1% of the working population classified themselves as working on a farm. Yet farms account for 47% of all deaths in the workplace. Are farms dangerous places? Yes, they are. We've all seen the news about quad bike accidents and other things that happen on farms. But what I want to put across here today is the reality of living and working on a farm. If you are living with domestic abuse, is that they are dangerous places. There's a culture of where there's livestock, there's dead stock. The life cycle exists, that's what farming is about. It's about breeding animals, producing animals or rearing animals, and then sending animals off to slaughter or using them for what they produce. That doesn't mean that farmers don't love their animals, because I've never been on a farm where they haven't. And everybody on that farm has the potential to be involved in the animals. If you've got 400 cows, it's really hard to give them all names, but some farmers do. But I can tell you that farmers will know their cows by number, and they'll be able to tell me all sorts of statistics about how much milk this cow produces every day in the springtime and in the summertime because it changes. And they'll be able to tell me what their mother produced as well. So there's a real depth of knowledge and care that goes in there. But farms are stressful places. In Northern Ireland, there's and anywhere in farming, there's a huge mental health crisis, and there's a lack of support for anybody on the farm, be they a perpetrator or be they abuser. So farms can be isolated. We know that with rural domestic abuse, that the physical isolation and the workload means that there's a real isolation. Sources of support are difficult to access. Um, Slurry pits are on the farm. People disappear in slurry pits. We used to have what we call death pits. They're illegal. They're holes in the ground where dead animals went. And just because they're illegal doesn't mean they don't still exist. There's equipment on farms, the back of a tractor, a thing called a PTO, where if you stick it attaches machinery to the tractor, and there are a lot of serious and fatal injuries on farm happening around that particular piece of machinery. There are firearms on farms. There are poisons, chemicals on farms. So if you live on a farm and you're living with domestic abuse, you will know that accidents can and do happen, and there's a real threat that that could happen to you. So I don't want it to all sound doom and gloom because are there routes to support? Are there options out there? Well, yes, there are, and I want to show this for two reasons. Um, there are people visiting farms. They're not as isolated as you might think because if you have a dairy farm, if you're producing milk, there'll be a milk tanker driver out once, if not twice a day. People come to deliver food on a regular basis, weekly, usually. There are agricultural inspectors. There are people trying to sell you stuff, and there are veterinary teams. And vets in Northern Ireland, there's a new health initiative, and it's run with in combination with the veterinary profession, the Farming Community Network, and Macmillan, and it's to help farmers talk to vets to try and reduce the time to diagnosis for cancers. So vets are getting continuing education to talk about this with farmers because we know that certainly the number of times I've been out in a farm and the farmer will say to you, can you just look at this lump? Can you? So we always signpost back to our human healthcare professionals and GPs, but we know that farmers often find it easier to open up to vets first. So you can see the role of the veterinary profession in there. And this emphasizes the need for a multi-agency approach, the one health, one welfare aspect that Rebecca was talking about. So there are sources of support on a farm, and we, as the veterinary profession in Northern Ireland, are hoping to grow this. There's mental health support for the farming community, north and south as well. Happy if anybody's interested in those and wants to learn more, give me a shout. So again, as the human people in the room, what you may think, well, I don't know enough about this. What can I do? And we're here to reassure you that you actually probably know more than you think. And you certainly, we at the Lynch group, we recommend, we are very careful to stay in our lane. We don't step outside our professional expertise, but we do strongly advocate using and exercising professional curiosity, and you can see how it can help us all. So, how we assess welfare in the animal world, there's this concept, the concept was the five freedoms, which you might have heard about. We know it's now referred to as the five domains, but more user-friendly approach is the five welfare needs. So animals need good nutrition, appropriate nutrition. They need an appropriate environment. They need their health to be looked after proactively, preventative healthcare and treatment when required. And they need to be allowed to express their normal behavioral interactions. Some species of animals want to be on their own, cats, believe it or not, and some species of animals have a herd mentality and think well, like horses and cattle, and rabbits should be kept in pairs. So different species have different requirements. We don't expect you to know that in detail, of course, but the fifth domain or the fifth need is the overall experience, what we describe as the mental health of the animal. So you, as human health and care professionals, people working in schools or education officers, you're working with people, you're looking for the same things that we are. Physical injuries, a poor and unsuitable environment, abandonment, obviously raises massive concerns. And behavior of the animal in the presence of an abuser, just the same as children and adults. The animal can show fear behavior, yes, of course. And that's probably very obvious to us all. But animals can also show appeasement behavior because you, just like a human victim survivor or person living with domestic abuse, you know, if you keep on the right side of the abuser, they might not hurt you. And animals do the same. Parasite infestations and poor basic healthcare are signs of concern, and you'll see that in neglect, but also restriction of access to resources. So if and Rebecca will touch on this in more detail, but no access to food or water and being denied veterinary treatment, and that forms part of the economic abuse. There are also links of animal abuse with serious and organized crime. So if you're in a household and you see the big scary type dogs that you think might be illegal in this country, or you see ears cropped, so like a dog with normally the ears flap down, but they might be illegally and artificially surgically corrected to stand up. That is a mutilation. That is illegal in the UK and in Ireland in most circumstances. So if you see that, that's a sign that something's not quite right. And dog fighting has strong, strong links with organised crime and abuse of people and abuse of animals. We see non-accidental injury, NAIs in animals, as you do in uh, particularly those of you who work with children will recognize these. The physical injuries that we see in dogs and cats are very, very similar to those which we see in children in particular. So they're typically inconsistent, discrepant, and repetitive injuries or stories, shall we say. So the injuries aren't consistent with an accidental trauma. So the cat who lives in the house that someone says that, oh, it must have been hit by a car, that's not likely to be true. Injuries that can't be explained by their owner, or if these animals do come into the vet, and very few of them sadly do, you might get different people giving you different explanations as to how the accident happened. And when we hear, oh, he fell, the cat fell off the windowsill, the dog fell down the stairs, animals don't usually fall. Animals have developmental milestones just as children, and in the same way that a 6-week-old baby cannot roll itself off the middle of the bed, cats can they have a righting reflex, and once that starts to develop from 6 weeks of age, so 8-week-old cats upwards, even if they fall out of a 6, 7 story window, they usually land on their feet. They might injure their jaw as it hits off the ground, but they rarely break and they don't fall. So if we hear that, that's immediately alarm bells in the veterinary profession. And we've already said can be very similar to NAIs that you see in children, including bruises, fractures, burns, and sexual abuse. So when we in the veterinary profession see NAIs in animals, we are concerned for that there might be other abuse going on in the home. It's not definitive, of course, but this is just adding to your index of suspicion. And again, a whole lecture in itself. So now, for the mental health experts in the room, you may have come across animal hoarding. It's a recognized psychological condition, and again, a very specialized area. But to touch on it briefly here, those people suffering from this condition believe that they're the only people who can care for the animals and they're looking after them properly, and usually they're in really poor health. This belief may cause problems with you actually getting into the home or the property where the animals are kept, either the human health professionals or the animal welfare professionals. Where these animals are is usually really unhealthy and nasty, unclean, insanitary environment. And those who are living with these animals are usually reluctant to allow anybody else in and often refuse transfer of themselves to allow for assessment of their mental health or their animals to allow for treatment as well. There's also a high, if you are entering this environment in your role, just wise to be aware that there's a risk of zoonotic disease. That's disease that can transfer from animals to people, such as ringworm or salmonella, the runs. And just be careful if you're going home to your own animals as well, because you can bring some like mite infestations or these diseases back to your children, back to your animals. Very briefly, there is help in legislation in Northern Ireland to support you in your role and us in our role to help look after animals. This is here for your notes, really, but basically, everybody who looks after or owns an animal in Northern Ireland has a positive duty of care to look after their animals. So you can't say, well, I didn't. You can't reasonably say, I didn't know, or this is sort of a crime of omission. Animals are recognized as sentient beings, and it is an offence to abduct animals that are commonly kept as pets in Northern Ireland. Our domestic abuse legislation, the explanatory notes and statutory guidance, actually does outline in the description of abusive behavior, coercive and controlling behavior, it outlines threats to hurt a child or a pet and deliberately not feeding the family pet to cause distress, that coercive and controlling behavior, the threats of harm, and agricultural livestock is also highlighted there. Now, the English statutory guidance does highlight the use of technology facilitated abuse, GPS trackers on animals, things like that, and also actually states that assistance animals, that the guide dogs and hearing dogs and therapy dogs, can be prone to this as well. So, Rebecca touched earlier on sexual abuse of children and sexual abuse of animals and the correlation between these crimes. There is currently a legislative gap. You can't adequately protect both the children and the animals from this. So the Lynch group in one of our trustees, Dave Martin, he's a vet and he's a veterinary forensic expert witness. He works for IVC Evidencia, which is one of the large veterinary corporate groups. They and the Lynch group and the Chartered Society of Forensic Sciences and Nature Watch Foundation, our sister organisation in protecting animals, protecting people, have come together, and there's currently a bill going through the House of Lords, the Crime and Policing Bill, and we have a tabled amendment to that to protect children and animals from sexual abuse. We've had strong support for this from Nota NI, so big shout out to them and thanks again for that. And we've a number of meetings this week actually on this. So watch this space. And again, if anybody wants more information on that and to help us protect children and animals of the future from sexual abuse, please do get in touch. So I'm going to mute now and go back over to Rebecca.
Thank you. So as an introduction to the next section now, where we're going to be really talking about the practicalities, how we actually think about this in practice and what some of the skills that we can employ when there are suspicions and maybe disclosures of animal abuse. So I want to draw your attention to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which recognises the need to protect children and animals. Which then, is highlighting the link that we're discussing. So the next slide. So let's think about practice opportunities. So it's really important, I think, to appreciate the value that people do place on their companion animals, because they really can impact decisions that people make, from simple decisions to major life decisions. And people often put the needs of their pets ahead of their own, actually, because that bond that someone has with their animal might also influence decisions around healthcare, going into hospital, or a care and treatment facility, or even temporary accommodation. So this is also important to consider, because access to pet-friendly or pet-inclusive emergency and support services can be a massive barrier for people. I think it is important to consider the areas of health and well-being that animals can impact, because quite frankly, a pet can literally be someone's will to live. And there is evidence actually that people won't carry out their suicide plans because of the relationship with their companion animal. So instead, because of that bond, they planned for survival instead. And so this is where attention to the human-animal relationships and social work and social care is really crucial, because knowing the ways in which companion animal can impact someone's life can give clues to risk and resilience factors, particularly when that bond is threatened or compromised. So the key message here, if there is one thing that you take away from today, and Andrea kind of touched on this earlier, is that it's actually not about the species. It's not about the breed or even the size of the animal. It's about the bond that people have, the bond that is threatened, the bond that is compromised, the bond that is exploited. And that's what's important to consider. Next slide. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to explain each one of these theories because, and particularly the social workers in this section, you'd probably be well aware of the theoretical framework that we draw from in social work practice. But I just want to highlight the ones that I think are relevant when we are thinking about the link between the abuse of animals and people. And look, theories are concepts, they're ideas that people have. Nothing particularly is set in stone, but there are, theories provide an opportunity for us to understand and appreciate why people do the things they do, why people are presenting in the way that they are, particularly when we are trying to engage with them during home visits in their own private space. So, excuse me, when we think about attachment and social support theory, which is the first two here, these can be used to think about human and companion animal relationships and the emotional and social benefits of these interactions. And research has found that some pet owners actually prefer their pets, their animals, over human relationships, and can experience significant and profound grief when their animals die, which reflects concepts from John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth work like proximity seeking and separation distress. And also when owners view their pets as a stable source of emotional comfort, it really highlights the role of pets as a secure base and a safe haven. And from what we know about the impact of pet loss and grief, particularly in the context of domestic abuse, we often refer to this in the social work world as disenfranchised grief. So this is grief that is not typically socially acknowledged or validated. And I certainly have heard many, many times, and people refer to, when their animals die, that people will have this default, well, they had a good life, or, you can just get another one. Well, that's not necessarily the case, because this bond is very, very complex. So when we think, sorry, can you just go back a bit? So when we think about, I just want to draw another two more here. So object relations theory is really quite an important one to think about. So this is how early childhood attachments, experiences and interactions with significant others, including pets, are internalized, and how those beliefs later affect relationships. And so this theory can be considered in the case of a child's relationship and attachment to their pet, and how and what they experienced, either positive or negative, from that relationship, and how those early experiences influence their attachment style in adulthood. And when we think about intersectionality in this context, this is about understanding all aspects of a person's identity, and this includes pets, and how that person can be really quite disadvantaged because of the relationship with their pet. Like, as we mentioned before, pets not being allowed in emergency accommodation or refuges, or in the private rental market. Historically, some landlords can choose to have a no pet policy. And so this can prevent victim survivors from fleeing abuse. So the disadvantage of abuse should not mean that victim survivors are unable to benefit from the human-animal bond or access services that are needed. Similarly, you might be supporting someone who is older and disabled, or someone who has dementia where animal abuse is an issue. So these are just things to highlight how this comes into play. Some of the key themes we've mentioned here.
Sorry, Rebecca, I think we've lost you there.
Well, yes, maybe just frozen.
Oh, we
Ashley.
froze
Yeah,
there.
Oh,
just
no, you're
lost you.
back.
We just lost your key themes there.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, so move to the next slide, where a massive storm is sort of in the beginning of now. So things are happening outside. So that's probably why the internet's a little bit unstable. So social workers in on screen probably quite familiar with the genogram, which is the kind of bread and butter of part of social work assessments. But similarly might be quite familiar to social care professionals. But if you are regularly conducting home visits, you are so well placed to notice and inquire about pets. Remember the stats right at the beginning, more than half of the population live with a companion animal. So the chances of pets being in the homes that you visit is pretty likely. Now, noticing and asking about the pets does not increase your workload because, as we mentioned, pets are considered family. So you should be asking about pets as you would other humans in the home and the human children in the home. Okay. So how humans in the family present themselves and the animals and how they're presenting themselves during these visits are actually vital parts of the assessment process. Observing how all family members behave and interact with each other and with their companion animals during a home visit can also help you to assess risk and resilience factors. So this is every reason why we must include pets in family genograms, assessments, and care and safety plans, and also life story work. And again, this doesn't add to your workload. It should be part of routine assessment. Okay, next slide. So how do we put all this into practice? So what is important to notice and observe during your home visits? So just a couple of examples from this diagram on things to observe and notice when you are visiting people in their home. Quite simple things, actually, like how many animals are in the home? How many animals are visible in the home? Are animals fighting with one another while you're there? Is the animal showing signs of injury? So have you noticed that they're limping? Are they bleeding anywhere? Can you see any open wounds? How is the animal presenting? Is the animal quiet, hiding, cowering under the table? Does it seem nervous? Seem aggressive? We are so familiar in social work, certainly in my experience in England, is that really the only mention of animals in any sort of referral or initial assessment is there a dangerous dog on site? And encourage social workers to think, well, there's a reason, there's a reason why dogs might be displaying aggression. And certainly we would not want you to be put at risk, but it doesn't stop you from asking and asking these questions. So have a look, is there any bedding where the animals sleep? Is it clean? How does the animal look physically? Does it look emaciated or obese? Can you see the rib bones? What about if animals are kept outside? Where do they sleep? Is the shelter suitable? Have you noticed any food or water bowls and are they clean? And also, how is the animal spoken about? Are any humans interacting with the animal during their visit? And if so, how is this being done? So it's little things that you can notice that actually could potentially paint a bigger picture. And this is why when we talk about conducting these holistic assessments, we have to think sometimes about potentially the unthinkable. So why is the dog chained up outside in the snow? Why is the dog cowering under the table? Why is the cat being referred to as it and not by its name? Why are there cat feces on the kids' pillows? Why is this 4-year-old child tugging at the rabbit's ears and the parent is laughing about it? Okay, so there are some questions you can ask sensitively. And again, we talk about professional curiosity and just making some, asking some curious questions. Quite similarly, you could ask, so who's mostly responsible for Buddy? And does Buddy have any particular care needs? Or I can see Buddy has a bloodshot eye. What's going on with that? You know, does Buddy, I can see Buddy sort of cowering under the table. Is that sort of normal behavior? Or does he normally do that when someone comes around? And tell me how the kids get on with Buddy. And so these sort of general questions can just start some of these conversations. Now, if you notice anything like these examples, we're not in any way suggesting that abuse and neglect is absolutely happening. But if you do have suspicions or concerns that it might be, then the chances of the humans in the home being abused or at risk of being abused is likely. And you have a professional responsibility to, at the very least, document your concerns and where needed, make a report to the relevant animal welfare agency or the police. Now, I also appreciate that there's some ethical challenges and dilemmas around doing that, which I'm going to explain in a moment. So it's really about being this, again, this professional curiosity and asking both direct and exploratory questions to help you understand what's going on in the family relationships and dynamics. Next slide. So let's just focus a little bit on children's experiences with their pets in the context of domestic abuse. So Callahan's research on children's experiences with their pets during domestic abuse is really quite interesting because it shows that children do form strong bonds with their companion animals because they provide a positive role model of caring and can help children learn to give and receive love and trust, particularly when these kinds of relationships might be missing in their lives while dealing with domestic abuse. And there's also other research that highlights how children's attachment to their pets increases with rates of family conflict. So it's crucial to support these bonds when victim survivors, both adults and children, leave abusive situations. And when children leave abusive homes, they face disruption and loss and uncertainty, worrying about their own safety, but also the safety of their companion animals that they may have had to leave behind. So acknowledging the importance of past relationships with pets and helping them to create new ones can help professionals understand and meet children's emotional and relational needs in their new environment. So next question. Some practical examples here, if you just keep clicking until we get probably the full screen there. Thanks, Andrea. So we know from practice and probably personal experience as well that some children and young people really struggle to navigate and articulate their feelings and emotions, and particularly for those in domestic abuse, process the gravity of what's going on. And it can be really helpful to include their pets when engaging in direct work with children and young people. And for those of you who have experience of working in children's services, you might be familiar with this diagram here, which is an adapted version of the 3 houses. Well, why not use a similar tool with the pet as the focus to build rapport and explore family dynamics? And I have some suggested questions here that could be asked during this process. And one of the questions in the rapport building stage, is this your first pet or have you had others, could actually give clues to risk and risk factors and further questions around how many pets they've had. Why have they had 5 pets in the past 3 months? So it's about the frequency of getting a new pet. What happened to their pets? But it can also give clues to resilience and how animals might be seen as a source of comfort and support. What we know about perpetrators of abuse is they will buy pets as a gift. and as a way of, making the family environment more happy or feel more safe. And this is, particularly important when we're thinking about children's early experiences of attachment and their early experiences of loss, which is typically their first experiences is with a pet and pet loss. So the exploratory and risk assessment questions here might help to identify welfare concerns for the animal, as well as risk factors that might be presenting. As I said before, these are just suggestions. It would be really important to be guided by where the child is at in the moment and how you frame those questions relating to their companion animals. Let's move to the next slide. So here are some suggested questions to ask adult victim survivors of abuse where you may have concerns or suspicions that the pets are also at risk. And asking questions like these can help you to understand interfamilial relationships and dynamics where the line of questioning is focused on the animal. Okay, this avoids blaming, sort of like a blaming sort of mentality. So this is about making a holistic assessment to really understand where there may be concerns about animal abuse in the context of domestic and child abuse. And the next slide. Some suggested questions to ask when there's a disclosure of animal abuse. So these questions can indicate the degree of risk and can offer a segue into safety planning, which is the next section that Andrea is going to be covering. And I'd like you to think about the standard risk assessment forms that you use in your day-to-day work. Do any of those mention pets? We know the DASH risk assessment does, but that's quite limited in itself. Are there any questions that refer to people's relationships or concerns about their pets? And if not, then take the initiative. Be proactive to ask some of these exploratory questions as part of your usual routine assessments. Next slide. So I mentioned about ethical challenges and dilemmas, and I think one of the most challenging areas in the work that we do is navigating ethical dilemmas in managing risk. And it can be so hard to build trust and rapport with victim survivors. And in social work and social care particularly, there is really limited time to be able to do this. So the guiding principle in this context, I think, is whenever you feel you don't have enough evidence to substantiate your suspicions, your assessment, or you doubt your suspicions, always consider the possibility of, what if I'm right? What if my suspicions are right? Even if you don't have the evidence to support those, and even if it puts the good working relationship that you have built with that family in jeopardy, your job is to safeguard vulnerable people and adults at risk of abuse. And as Andrea explained, there is legislation in place that allows us to breach confidentiality where animal welfare or the public interest is compromised. So as social workers, social care professionals, you are not expected to be experts in animal welfare. And actually, you don't even have to you don't have to have the evidence to support your suspicions, but you do have a responsibility to report those. And I think the key message here is, however uncomfortable and challenging it might feel asking these questions, what if you don't ask them? What if your suspicions might be right and you didn't report them? And the other point I want to make as well is, you don't even have to like animals. You don't even have to be an animal person to appreciate the bond, and it should not stop you from asking the questions. Okay. Next slide. Andrea.
Thanks, Rebecca. So in Northern Ireland, we don't have the same options for people who are fleeing domestic abuse as we do in GB yet. But bear with us on that. that work is in progress, and that's why it's really important for us to raise awareness of the issue. And we're working with DERA, with the Department of Justice. We have liaised with the Department of Health as well on this, because many of you will be aware that of the domestic and sexual abuse strategy that is jointly run between the Department of Health and the Department of Justice, and the executive offices ending violence against women and girls. So we're linked in all those, and with the PSNI as well. So when you're thinking about safety planning, exploring options for temporary care in Northern Ireland is really difficult. And I apologise for that, and I appreciate it, and I know what you're up against. But we are, as the Lynch Group, and our relationship with charities here, both in the animal welfare charities here, but also with Women's Aid and with the PSNI and with Assist NI. This is something that we are working to progress. So temporary care options are often family, friends, animal charities, and general, sometimes the police will take a pet into kennels, but that is extremely rare. So first of all, we're considering how to safely remove the pet from the environment, and that can be really difficult. So I'm going to point you at this stage to our specialist domestic abuse animal fostering services, because even though they're not operating here in Northern Ireland currently, they will give support and advice. And you've got our email there as well, although we're not a 24/7 service. So it's important to consider safe removal of the pets, just as you would with any risk assessment and removing anybody. There are particular dangers around removing an animal as well. Dogs you can take out for a walk and not come back. Horses, somewhat more difficult, and removing fish tanks from a child's bedroom can be difficult too. It's really important to understand that microchips can be abused. So legally, all dogs in Northern Ireland above a certain age should have a microchip. They also should be licensed, but we know that this isn't 100%, far from 100%. But it's totally possible for someone to walk into a veterinary practice and say, can I just check that you've updated our details? We moved house. Can I just check you've got the new details on the system? And the person on the computer turns around and said, yeah, your new address is this. And they've just unwittingly given away the address of the victim survivor, where they fled to, because of that abuse of the microchip system. So we at the Lynch Group, we're raising awareness of this within the veterinary professions, within all members of the veterinary team, to try and reduce this happening, and also with animal dog wardens in Northern Ireland, and those who are responsible for administering the microchip data for horses as well. So it's important to be aware that microchips can be abused to track a victim survivor once they've left. GPS trackers, we have found those on in dog bedding, on dog collars, in feed bags, in hamsters' cages, and it's, so again, if you're not aware of the risks, you can't assess for them. And if you can't assess for them, you can't mitigate for them. So being aware of the lengths that a perpetrator will go to track an animal, to track all victim survivors, and to get them back, we shouldn't underestimate that. And that's where raising awareness is really, really important. Protecting the veterinary history. If the animal is registered to the perpetrator, they are totally legally and ethically able to go in and request the full clinical records from the vets. And there's nothing the vet can do to stop that going across. And that history can be abused as well. So that's a problem that we're facing in the veterinary profession, and that we're working to raise awareness of. So we're careful about what we put in records and where on clinical records we put it. Many of you will be unaware, until 2013, vets were not allowed to break client confidentiality unless it was something like foot and mouth disease, notifiable disease. The Lynch Group worked with the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, a regulatory body for vets and veterinary nurses in the UK, to raise awareness of this. And it's now in our Code of Conduct, as of January 2023, that we are allowed to break client confidentiality where the public interest is is high, and it specifies where we are concerned about domestic abuse and where we are concerned about child abuse and a few other animal things as well. But not all the veterinary profession don't read the codes of conduct before they go to bed every night. So not everybody is aware of that. And there's absolute terror, as I'm sure many of you who are regulated will understand, terror of being hold up on disciplinary proceedings. And client confidentiality has been so sacrosanct in the veterinary profession for such a long time that that barrier still exists. And it's really important for you to know in the human safeguarding field and human health and care professionals that when we look at safeguarding, veterinary professionals do not receive safeguarding training unless they come to us, unless they've been at our non-mandatory undergraduate veterinary training. When we look at for mention of safeguarding in our codes to professional conduct, it's talking about safeguarding drugs and talking about safeguarding clinical records. So please just be aware of that. You really have taught us so much when we do our multi-agency day meetings in your approach to safeguarding, that safeguarding trumps everything. But just be aware of important to just be aware of why some veterinary practices might seem reluctant to report. There are reasons for it, but by working together, we can improve that. So we've got to be mindful of the safety of pets if they are fostered locally by family and friends, because you can imagine if a pet is taken from Belfast and walked in Benone, it's entirely possible in Northern Ireland that someone's going to know them or spot them. And be really aware of the post that goes up on Facebook saying, help me find my lost dog, so that I can find the person who left me and get them back. Just things to be aware of. Oh, it's all right. So the specialist domestic abuse animal fostering services, these are existing in GB. The biggest ones are Dogs Trust Freedom, a specialist service for dogs, and Cats Protection Lifeline, specialist service for cats. Endeavour is the oldest service. It takes all pets. They've taken from Madagascar hissing cockroaches to pygmy goats, and they're based in Bolton. And Refuge for Pets is based in Devon and Cornwall, and likewise they take and have taken everything and anything. So if I show you the map on the next page, you'll see that there's a grey area. We'll ignore the grey area in the southwest of England because we're closing that. But I don't like the grey area of Northern Ireland. We're the only devolved region of the UK that doesn't have a specialist animal fostering service. The services are specialist because they're all members, full members of Women's Aid, Federation of England. Everybody has received domestic abuse training. All the staff are female. They don't wear uniforms, don't wear branding. They are all trauma-informed practitioners, and they look after the foster carer, they look after the pet, they look after the victim survivor, and they look after their staff. They have over 75 years of combined experience. They have supported thousands of victim survivors of domestic abuse, whether they've got skin, fur, feather, or scales. And that combined experiences, and as you can imagine as professionals, the combined mistakes, all those experiences have added up to help us understand risk, assess for it, and mitigate for it. To give you an example, we haven't completed 2025 figures, but in 2024 we supported over 1,000 victim survivors of domestic abuse by fostering 1,500 animals. These services are free. They must be referred in by a professional service such as Women's Aid or the police or social care, social work and social care. But they provide an absolute lifeline. Well, I'm aware Cats Protection Lifeline is poorly named for those of us here in Northern Ireland, so we are aware of that. As I say, we don't have a service here in Northern Ireland, but those 4 services are available for help and support. We have, under the radar, fostered animals from Northern Ireland and taken them across the water. And as I say, that's all done free of charge. So if you come up against this, please contact us. If we can help, we will. We cannot promise. We are hoping to bring a small pilot to Northern Ireland later this year, but that is totally dependent on funding. Anybody got any ideas? Do tell us and let us know. So that's a very quick run through of the fostering services. I don't think we have time for the video. We'll send you links to the video and other videos, which hopefully Alison and the team will distribute later. And I unfortunately that. We worked with the Department of Health to create a reflections type document on the link, specifically for social work practice in Northern Ireland. I believe that was published in December. We do have a deeper dive on that. It's freely available to download on our virtual learning hub. It's an interactive PDF, so it's got a number of links to external resources and further resources that we've created, that Rebecca has created, including PDFs and webinars. And finally, for any of you who are working in the home environment at all, we do have our free course. It's modular, it's on our virtual learning hub. You can start and stop as you wish. Your progress is saved. For those of you who have domestic abuse training, sexual abuse training, child protection training, you'll fly through a lot of the sections of it. It should take about an hour to do if you just go through the baseline course. If you click on the links, it'll take you much longer. Those are there for deeper learning, or if you experience something in practice and you want to go back and know more, that's there. And you can do that. As I say, start, stop, progress as you wish, come back, learn more. It's developed in partnership with over 25 subject matter experts, and it is designed so that we can update this in line with changes in legislation, changes in the evidence, statistics, and in response to learner and partner feedback. So please, we intend this to evolve, and we intend it to involve with your input. So we welcome all and any feedback in it. It has all the signposting details that you need in Northern Ireland. And if we've missed any, that's my fault. Let me know and I'll add it on. And I think that's pretty much us. We warned you it would be a whistle-stop tour, so sorry about that. And we will happily take any questions. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now.